there! Welcome to skpyt Productions. I'm Current Goes Kokon. Let's get into the video. In today's video, we're not going to be doing our alternative history video. We're going to delay that by a week because today it's the finals of the Euros 2021. Now, for people outside of Europe, they won't really understand how important this is, but England has got to the finals for the first time in 55 years. So since we won the World Cup in 1966, this has been the first time that we've got to the finals in a football tournament, right? Now, most people will be like, so what? But for English people, this is incredibly important. You know, like normally we get kicked out in like the quarterfinals. Sometimes in rare years, we manage to get to the semi-finals. Sometimes we get kicked out of it completely, you know. But it's a thing where this is a really momentous time. So, you know, I'm filming this at now about 12 o'clock, and so the match won't be until 8 o'clock. So, you know, by the time you actually end up watching this a few days from now, you already know what the result is. I'm predicting it will probably get down to penalties, so it might be 5-4 to Italy. So I don't think we're necessarily going to win it, but yeah, like the fact that we're even in the finals is already like really good, right? So the fact that England has managed to get this far as opposed to most other years, it's meant that conversations about national identity have been able to get much further than normally would, you know, and people have got a lot more worked up about it, and a lot of people have had to think a lot more and have a lot more kind of conversations about it and stuff, yeah, much more than they normally would, because this country is not a very patriotic country in some regards. You know, in other regards it's very patriotic, but in some regards it's not. So people say simultaneously it's coming home, and then at the same time you'll have other people who say it's not coming home. And that's a very English thing to kind of say, right? Because most other countries, people are, you know, they fly the flag, they're very proud of their country. But in England, it's the only country I've ever been to where flying the flag is associated with, well, racism, with the you know, the bad things about their past, etc, etc. Most national flags, people see it as a source of pride, but only in England, as far as I've been you know, observing it, England seems to be the only country I've been to where some people will be embarrassed by the flag. You know, people want to take the flag down because they'll see it as some sort of like negative connotation, right? So that's kind of what we're going to discuss in this video, yeah. And you know, it's reflecting on some of the conversations I've had both with my friends, but also, you know, I work in this school at the moment, and you know, having conversations with some of the young people, because obviously this is kind of the next generation. So simultaneously, I've had a conversation with one student who, you know, is like pure English, right? And he said that unless you're pure English, you can't support England. So even if like you're part Irish or you're part Spanish or you're part whatever, yeah, you can't support England, right? You have to support some other team. On the flip side, we also have a student who has only recently kind of reached parity with regard to being fluent in speaking English, yeah, because, you know, he's an immigrant. And yet he's saying, right, when the match is on, I'm going to be wearing an England flag on my face, you know, I'm going to be, like, have it painted on, and I'm going to be cheering for England. And then on top of that, you had another student who said that he's literally cheering for any team other than England in the hope that England lose, and then there won't be as much nationalism like kind of in the country, because nationalism is tied to the British Empire and slavery and blah 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 blah. So he's hoping that England lose so that it doesn't, you know, so that people aren't as proud to be English anymore. So all these kind of things are like conversations which people have quite a lot in England, right? And this is kind of what we want to talk about in this thing, because even amongst my own friends, I have some people who are obviously very supportive of England. And I have some people who, you know, they were, you know, like they're immigrants, but yeah, they still like fly the flag and like kind of like cheer when England are playing. Then I've got some other people who like were born here, lived here all their lives, you know, the family are English, etc. And yet they, you know, they get swept up when it's like football time and stuff, and they'll cheer for England. But the rest of the time, they, you know, they wouldn't be caught dead with a flag. Also people who are like immigrants to this country, like, but then also kind of, again, will cheer for any other like kind of like team other than England. So it's a thing both within like the general population and also within my kind of friendship group as well. You have this wide range of different perspectives on English national identity and whether people belong to it and whether people don't belong to it. And it kind of comes down to this thing of this debate between exclusivity and inclusivity. So that's kind of what we're going to get into in this video. So first of all, we have to ask, what is a nation? What is a country, right? So it's kind of, as I've said in previous videos, if you check out the video on what if England remained Catholic, Yeah, and also one of the more recent videos that come out, which is a clip one, which focuses on the English Protestant Reformation, and that one kind of focuses more specifically on this thing of English national identity. But it's a thing of, more often than not, national identities are defined, it's in part what like the nation is, right? So certain stereotypes about a country tend to kind of like form a bit of what that national identity is. So for instance, the English, we like queuing, we like to complain about the weather, we have terrible food, we have terrible teeth, although that's obviously nothing that we're necessarily proud of and stuff. Then also, this thing of whenever we go to foreign countries, we insist on them speaking English, even though we should probably learn the language. We get annoyed at them for not speaking English, even though we're not in England, right? And then similarly as well, when we go on holiday, we end up being just a liability wherever we go, kind of thing. And so that's kind of a broad definition of what it means to kind of be English as in a way. Then similarly, it's, national identities are defined also by what you're not, right? So historically, it's been a thing where Englishness has been defined as not Celtic, not Catholic, and not continental. So, so if you think about, the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish, right? England has been separate from them because of the Anglo-Saxon settlements and stuff from like the 5th century onwards. So England's the land of the Anglo-Saxons, right? So that's kind of where the name England comes from. And so been separated from like the Celts in that way. On top of that, because of the English Protestant Reformation, we were separated from, oh, I just realised it slipped. Oh. Come on, England. Anyway, so we've also been separated because of the English Protestant Reformation from like Catholics, who were predominantly like on the continent, like Spain, France, and all these kind of places, right? So this kind of gave us a kind of siege mentality in a way. So for instance, when Shakespeare talks about this being a sceptered isle, this is kind of like what was kind of meant by it and stuff, right? In terms of it being this kind of like fortress, like kind of like separate from the rest of the continent. And on top of that, when we talk about like the continent, when we talk about Europe, like as I've said in previous videos, English people go to Europe, right? Even though, geography students will be like, well, England is part of Europe. It's a thing where it's like, no, it's to do with national identity, So Europe is the continent. Europe is France, Germany, Holland, all these kind of places. So even though Holland, for instance, has a Germanic language, even though Holland, has been Protestant historically, even though there's lots of things that England and Holland have in common with each other, that they're both like kind of like liberal, property owning, capitalist like democracy and stuff. Even still, when you go to Holland, you very much feel like you're in Europe. Whereas when you're in England, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. Maybe if you're an American or whatever, you might be like, oh, well, it's all just Europe. But for people in England, it doesn't feel like that, right? So this is kind of one of the things where, so English national identity has kind of been defined as much by what we are as well as by what we're not. So what are some of the things that the English believe in? Well, we have so-called British values, right? So we have individual liberty, democracy, rule of law, and tolerance. Now, some people have said, well, they're not, they're not British values, they're universal values. Well, first of all, where did these values originate from? They didn't originate from China, didn't originate from the Middle East, didn't originate from South America, didn't originate from Africa, didn't originate from Germany, from France, from Holland, from Spain, from Italy. These are British values. And when we say British values, when we actually think about it, people in the Highlands didn't come up with these values. People in Wales, in the valleys of Wales, didn't come up with these values. People in Northern Ireland didn't come up with these values. These are essentially English values. So what I mean by this is this: individual liberty is something which, as we discussed in previous videos, comes down from a long line of of a heritage from the Anglo-Saxons. So the Anglo-Saxons were very big on this idea of individual liberty. So you as an individual were were free as long as there was due process of the law. So even the king, yes, obviously the king was more important, but the king couldn't act outside of the law, right? The king had to, still couldn't deprive people of their liberty without due process. And this is also what's tied in with this rule of law. So rather than being a rule of men, where just the person in charge gets to dictate all the rules, it's a thing where actually, no, even the king himself is subject to these same laws. And then on top of that, when we talk about democracy, it shouldn't really be said as democracy, because obviously democracy existed in Greece, existed in the Igbo, in Nigeria, existed in many different places, right? So what we mean by democracy more is parliamentary democracy, right? So this idea of parliament and the sovereignty of parliament, yeah? So parliament acting as a defender of like the people's right and as a representative of the people. And so again, this is what the English Civil War was about. This is about the fact that, again, the king is beholden to parliament and not the other way around, right? So the people, this is what the nation is really like about, you know. So yes, obviously we have the queen still, yes, obviously we have the monarchy more generally, but it doesn't mean that they can just make whatever rules they want. It's a thing where in a parliamentary democracy there's checks and balances on all these different institutions, right? So this is kind of what we mean when we say democracy, right? We actually mean parliamentary democracy. And again, when we talk about tolerance, this idea of this, like, you know, lit and live, like this idea of like lit and let live, lit and live and let live. I don't know why I messed that up. So this whole idea of live and let live kind of came as a result of our history. You know, obviously you had, with the Reformation, you obviously had the split from Rome. So you had a large number of Catholics in the country, and then also you had the Anglican Church. But then the Anglican Church, you know, you end up having splits from that. You had the Calvinists, you had Lutherans, you had Methodists, you had the Puritans, etc., etc. And so it was a thing where, you know, trying to impose a top-down kind of thing on all these different groups and saying what you can believe and what you can't believe, it was just an unworkable thing. And based within like the framework of like people having individual liberty, it became a thing where it's like, well, who's the government to say like what faith you follow, right? And you know, over time, this kind of end up filtering down to like political beliefs as well, and just just people's identity in general. Yeah, you know, like over time we become more tolerant of people from different ethnicities, people with different religions, people from different sexual orientations, etc., etc. And so trying to like build a kind of modern pluralistic society, yeah, where you have people from all different groups living under the same flag, requires a lot of tolerance, right? You know, we can see that the contrast of this when we look at France, for instance. France, their national identity is very much like, right, imposing so-called French culture on everyone else, right? And this leads to a lot of hostility, because if you don't fit narrowly within the specific thing of what French culture is, then you're then feeling like marginalized and you're feeling excluded from it. So I suppose like the whole question of this is, you know, what does England stand for, right? Now, most other countries have a kind of like a national motto. You know, you think about America, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You think of France, liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Yeah, so that was my attempt to speak in some of the French. You know, Germans have Einigkeit, Recht und Freiheit, which is, you know, unity, law, and freedom, if I remember correctly. And you know, so different countries all have like their own little like mottos and stuff. And England doesn't really have a motto. You know, our motto is, you know, I can't say it, I'm not going to try and say it. Yeah, but it's like my right and my I can't remember what, oh my God, or whatever it is. Yeah, right. But it's like some old thing, basically saying that the king is like ordainedly like empowered by God. Basically, that it doesn't really mean anything to like most people. Most people don't know what it means. But I'd say that if England was really to have a national motto, it would be life, liberty, and property, right? And this is something which was said by John Locke. So this is kind of where the Americans get the idea of, you know, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But having life, liberty, and property means that, you know, people have the right to, you know, live their life as they want to, you know, and like to basically just be free. And like also as well, if they want to set their own businesses, if they want to have property, you know, they have a right to that property, right? You know, like as they say, like kind of like an Englishman's house is his castle, right? So even the king can't just barge into someone's house, yeah, without being invited or without having some sort of arrest warrant if it's so ordained. But this is the whole thing, yeah. This whole thing of England and its national identity is one which is kind of steeped in this idea of liberty, right? You know, land of hope and glory, mother of the free, Britons never shall be slaves. Ironically said by people who own slaves. But anyway, like as we've said before in previous videos, there's a great deal of hypocrisy, as with anything. But it's, I don't know how to kind of say this yet. Like England is it's complicated, yeah. And English national identity is a complicated thing because there's no one who's purely English. Obviously, English people are descendants of Celts, of Vikings, of Normans, of Anglo-Saxons, of Romans, etc., etc. So there's not, you can't really make this kind of idea. No one's pure English in that kind of way. So we've all had to kind of like tolerate each other and to understand each other, and also as well like living on an island with Scottish people and Welsh people, and also like across the sea with Irish people. We've had to learn how to kind of like just get along together and to be like inclusive, right? Because that's the only way you can kind of like govern like such a tiny little island. So this is where we get into the territory of overlapping identities, and this is where it starts to get really complicated. So for instance, you'll have people who like identify as European first, British second, not English, and as Londoners, right? And then you also have people who identify as, you know, British and English equally. And then you have people who identify as English, not British, and, you know, and not European, for instance. And again, from an outside perspective, you'll be like, huh? But you're European, you like on the geographical level, you're all of those things, right? But it kind of ignores how people kind of feel about themselves, right? Because national identity isn't something which can be imposed on someone. It has to be something which is felt like from within. And similarly as well, you have some people who are descendants of immigrants who could be like third generation immigrant, but they'll still identify as being Jamaican, as being Indian, as being Pakistani, etc., etc. So again, it's like, how do we kind of, in the 21st century, how do we kind of build this kind of thing we called England? Because, you know, with you know, like with like the breakup of the UK, you know, as we discussed in previous videos, Ireland could unite at some point, so we end up losing Northern Ireland. So the Union Jack could end up losing the kind of the red solitaire that goes throughout it, because that represents St. Patrick. Similarly as well, Scotland could get its independence any year now, so you know the blue in the Union Jack would go. So then if all we're left with is, keeps slipping on this shoulder, if all we're left with is just St. George, then what is England, right? Like what does it even mean to be British? Like if Wales leaves, then, you know, then we're just England by ourselves. So how do we build inclusive like England in the 21st century, where people don't look at this flag and think of it as an exclusive flag? We don't see it as a flag which excludes people based on race or based on whatever, right? So people should never say like, oh, unless you're pure English, you should, you know, like English is a state of mind, right? So if I identify as English, I'm English, right? That should be how it is. And similarly, like this is where like the different concepts of citizenship kind of like come into clash, because you have jus sanguis, I can't pronounce Latin, right? But there's the, like, it's basically citizenship of the blood. So like you end up getting that citizenship by it being passed down and stuff, right? So that's one concept of like national identity. And then there's the other kind, which is jus soli, which is basically of the soil, right, of the land. So basically anyone who was born in this country or anyone who lives in the country is that country, right? So anyone who lives in England or was born in England, they're English, right? So I think that is a much more inclusive kind of way of looking at things. This is also how America has formed its national identity. Obviously, you've got many different ethnicities that make up America. You know, America is a nation founded on immigrants, and so while America has been exclusive in many ways in the past, and trying to say these people are not American, these people are not American, as time's gone on, they've had to, you know, basically build this like melting pot, and basically like allow everyone to kind of own this thing of being an American. And I think similarly, England in the 21st century is going to have to move down this route, because you can't like undo years and years of like immigration, right? Immigration has happened, mass migration has happened, so people are not going anywhere. And so it's a thing of, you can't keep up this thing of this exclusive definition of what it means to be English, right? English needs to go beyond race, beyond ethnicity. English needs to be, this is who we are. We're English, right? And I think that's kind of, in broad summary, what I'd say, like, these are my feelings when it comes to national identity. But I'd love to know what you in the comments section think about this. Keep it respectful, please. Keep it very respectful. But you know, if you like this video and you like other videos like on our channel, definitely don't forget to hit the like button. Also subscribe. We've got a whole lot more content and stuff. Normally this channel does alternative history videos. However, we are going to be moving on to film reviews, and we're going to be talking about like different classic films, and you know, the channel is going to kind of build on from there. And yeah, like also as well, I've got a Patreon account. So as I said, I'm working in schools at the moment, but I'm like wrapping up that in the next few weeks, right? So this is going to be my full-time job, doing like, you know, being a YouTuber, and to have like the space to kind of have conversations like this, yeah, and to like delve into really in-depth kind of topics, I will kind of need a lot of like some financial support as well, because, you know, I ain't a millionaire, so I kind of need something to kind of keep the lights going. So with all that being said, I really hope you enjoy that video, and also stay tuned for the next video, which is what this video is meant to be, which is what if the Mongols invaded Japan, right? So we're gonna look into the history of that and everything, and yeah, in the meantime, have a great day, and bye.